My mom called me the backup daughter my whole life. At my engagement dinner, she said my sister deserved my fiancé more. For as long as I can remember, my older sister Vanessa has been the golden child. She was prettier, smarter, more talented, and my mother made sure I knew it every single day growing up. When I got a B on a test, my mom would ask why I couldn't be more like Vanessa, who got straight A's. When I joined the soccer team, my mom said it was cute that I was trying, but reminded me that Vanessa was a state champion in volleyball. When I got accepted into a good college, my mom said it was nice, but it wasn't the Ivy League school Vanessa got into. I spent my entire childhood being the backup daughter, the one who existed just in case something happened to the real one. I moved out at 18 and kept my distance for years. I built my own life, my own career, and eventually I met Luis. Luis is everything I ever wanted. He is kind and supportive, and he loves me for exactly who I am. He proposed 6 months ago, and I said yes immediately. We decided to have an engagement dinner with both of our families to celebrate. I was nervous about having my mother there, but Luis convinced me it would be fine, and that maybe this could be a fresh start. The dinner was at a nice restaurant, and everything was going well for the first hour. My mother was on her best behavior and even complimented my dress, which shocked me. Then Vanessa showed up late. She walked in wearing a white dress that was way too formal for the occasion, and immediately started talking about her recent promotion. My mother's eyes lit up the way they always do when Vanessa enters a room. The conversation shifted entirely to Vanessa's accomplishments for the next 30 minutes. I tried to redirect things back to the engagement, but my mother kept steering it back to my sister. Then my mother stood up and said she wanted to make a toast. I thought maybe she was finally going to say something nice about me. She raised her glass and said she was so happy for Luis, and that he was such a wonderful man. Then she looked at Vanessa and said it was such a shame he met the wrong sister first. She laughed like it was a joke, but then kept going. She said Vanessa would have been a much better match for someone like Luis. She said Vanessa was more beautiful, more successful, and honestly more deserving of a man like him. She said she hoped Luis knew what he was getting with me, but that it wasn't too late to upgrade. The table went dead silent. Luis's parents looked horrified. Luis himself looked like he wanted to disappear. Vanessa just sat there smiling like she agreed with every word. I felt my face get hot and my hands started shaking. 26 years of being told I wasn't good enough came rushing back all at once. I stood up and told my mother I had something to say too. I told her that 2 months ago I was helping her set up her new phone, and I saw her messages with Vanessa. I saw every single text where they talked about me behind my back. I saw my mother call me an embarrassment. I saw Vanessa say I was punching above my weight with Luis. I saw my mother agree and say she didn't understand what he saw in me. I saw them make a plan for Vanessa to flirt with Luis at this very dinner to see if his head could be turned. I watched both of their faces drain of color. My mother stammered that I was taking things out of context. Vanessa said I was being dramatic. Luis stood up and told both of them to leave. My mother started crying and said I was ruining the family. I told her no. She ruined it 26 years ago when she decided I would never be good enough. They left and Luis's mother came over and hugged me and told me I handled that with more grace than they deserved. But that wasn't the end of it. Because what my mother doesn't know yet is that I screenshotted every single one of those messages. And the family group chat that includes all of our aunts, uncles, cousins, and grandparents is about to get a very interesting update. I sit in my car outside the restaurant for 20 minutes with my finger hovering over the send button. The screenshots are queued up in the family group chat. Once I hit send, there's no taking it back. My hands are still shaking from the confrontation, but I feel clearer than I have in years. The steering wheel is cold under my palms, and I can see my breath fogging up the windshield. I read through the screenshots one more time. Every cruel text is there. My mother calling me an embarrassment. Vanessa saying I was punching above my weight with Luis. Their plan for tonight written out in black and white. I press send. The message delivers to 43 family members. The screenshots show every cruel text between my mother and Vanessa, including the plan to have Vanessa flirt with Luis tonight. Within seconds, the read receipts start popping up. 1, 3, 7, 15. My phone begins buzzing with incoming messages. The screen lights up over and over. I watch the notifications pile up, but I don't open any of them yet. Someone is calling, then someone else. I silence my phone and drop it in the cup holder. Luis finds me in the parking lot and gets into the passenger seat without saying anything. He takes my phone gently and turns it off. Then he holds my hand while I cry. His parents follow us home in their car to make sure we get there safely. Luis's mother makes tea while I sit on the couch trying to process what I just did. She doesn't ask questions. She just sits next to me and rubs my back in small circles. Luis's father talks quietly with Luis in the kitchen. I can hear the low rumble of their voices, but not the words. Luis's mother stays over in our guest room. I wake up the next morning and turn my phone back on. 217 notifications. The number makes my stomach drop. Luis's mother is already awake and she helps me sort through messages. She sits next to me on the couch with her reading glasses on and identifies which family members are supportive and which are attacking me. My uncle Dominic sends a long message saying he always suspected my mother treated me differently, but never realized how bad it was. He says he's sorry for not speaking up sooner. My Aunt Fern calls and talks to me for an hour about her own experiences with my mother's cruelty when they were younger. She says my mother has always needed someone to put down to feel superior. Before I was born, Fern was that target. She tells me about family dinners where my mother would criticize everything from her cooking to her clothes to her choice of husband. She apologizes for not protecting me and says she's done making excuses for my mother's behavior. Her voice cracks when she tells me she should have been braver. 3 cousins from my father's side create a separate group chat without my mother or Vanessa or my grandmother. They share their own stories of my mother's comments about me over the years. Things I never knew she said at family gatherings I didn't attend. One cousin tells me my mother said I was lucky to have a job at all given my limited abilities. Another cousin says my mother complained that I embarrassed the family by not being as accomplished as Vanessa. The pattern of her cruelty is even more extensive than I realized. My mother sends me a series of texts that swing between rage and guilt tripping. She calls me ungrateful. She says I've humiliated her in front of the entire family. She demands I delete the messages and apologize. When I don't respond, she threatens to show up at my apartment. Luis changes our door code and tells the building security not to let her up. He makes the call while I'm still reading through messages, and I hear him give them a physical description of my mother. Vanessa tries a different approach by texting Luis directly. She apologizes for the misunderstanding and asks if they can talk privately to clear the air about what happened. Luis screenshots her message and shows it to me right away. Then he blocks her number without responding. He doesn't even hesitate. My father calls for the first time 3 days after the dinner. He sounds exhausted. He says my mother has been hysterical, but he admits that what she said at the dinner was wrong. He asks if I'll consider family therapy. I tell him I'm not interested in fixing something my mother doesn't think is broken. He's quiet for a long time. Then he says he understands and hangs up. Luis's best friend Grant comes over with takeout. He tells me that half his family is now following the drama because Luis's parents told them what happened. Grant says his own mother dealt with a toxic sister, and that cutting contact was the best decision she ever made. The validation from people outside my family helps me feel less crazy. Grant stays for dinner and tells stories about his mother's journey to set boundaries. He makes me laugh for the first time in days. Regina texts me 3 days after Grant leaves. She asks if we can meet for coffee. I haven't seen her in years because my mother always found excuses to keep us apart. She lives 2 hours away and says she'll drive to me. We meet at a small cafe near my apartment. Regina looks older than I remember, but her smile is warm when she hugs me. She orders us both lattes and we sit by the window. She tells me she saw everything in the group chat and had to reach out. She says she's been watching my mother treat me badly since I was a kid. She stopped coming to family events 5 years ago because she couldn't stand to see it anymore. Her voice gets quiet when she apologizes for not speaking up sooner. She says she was young and didn't know how to challenge my mother without causing a scene. She tells me about a Christmas dinner when I was 12, where my mother spent an hour talking about Vanessa's awards and didn't mention me once, even though I was sitting right there. Regina says she went home that night and cried because she felt so angry on my behalf. She reaches across the table and squeezes my hand. She tells me I'm brave for finally standing up and that she's proud of me. For 2 hours about everything that happened. She shares stories about her own complicated relationship with her mother and how setting boundaries changed her life. When we leave, she makes me promise to stay in touch. She says she wants to be part of my life now that my mother isn't controlling who I can see. The drive home feels lighter knowing I have her support. The family group chat explodes while I'm having dinner with Luis. My phone starts buzzing so much I have to put it face down on the table. Luis picks it up and reads the notifications. His face gets tight and he shows me the screen. My grandmother posted a long message defending my mother. She says I've always been too sensitive and that I'm making a big deal out of nothing. She claims my mother loves both her daughters equally and that I'm being dramatic about the dinner. She tells everyone I'm tearing the family apart over a misunderstanding. The replies come in fast. My Uncle Dominic writes back saying it wasn't a misunderstanding and that he saw the screenshots. My Aunt Fern posts that she's tired of making excuses for my mother's cruelty. Someone I barely know jumps in to say I should forgive my mother because family is everything. Another cousin argues back that family doesn't give you permission to be cruel. The thread keeps growing with people taking sides. My Uncle Cassius posts a message suggesting everyone take a break and cool off before saying things they'll regret. Nobody listens. The fighting gets worse with people bringing up old grudges and past arguments that have nothing to do with me. Someone accuses someone else of being a bad parent. Another person brings up a wedding from 10 years ago where feelings got hurt. The whole chat turns into a mess of anger and blame. Luis finally takes my phone and turns off the notifications. He says I don't need to read any more of it tonight. I feel sick knowing my grandmother is defending my mother after everything she saw. Luis orders takeout and we watch a movie to distract ourselves, but I can't stop thinking about the messages piling up on my phone. A letter arrives in my mailbox 4 days later. I recognize my mother's handwriting on the envelope. My stomach drops when I see how thick it is. I take it inside and sit on the couch before opening it. 6 pages fall out, front and back, covered in my mother's neat cursive. She starts by saying she's heartbroken that I won't answer her calls. She claims the toast at the dinner was just a joke and that I took it the wrong way. She writes that she's always loved both her daughters equally and that I'm remembering my childhood wrong. She says she was hard on me because she wanted me to reach my full potential. She brings up times she helped me with homework or drove me to soccer practice like that erases everything else. She writes that Vanessa is devastated by what I've done, and that I'm destroying our family. She says I'm being selfish and cruel by refusing to forgive her. The letter goes on and on with the same manipulation written different ways. She never actually apologizes for what she said. She never admits that her words at the dinner were wrong. Instead, she blames me for being too sensitive and for holding grudges. The last page says she's willing to forgive me if I apologize to her and Vanessa publicly in the family group chat. She signs it with love. Mom, like nothing she wrote was hurtful. I read the whole thing twice and my hands start shaking. The anger builds in my chest until I have to stand up and move. I grab my keys and tell Luis I need to walk. He offers to come with me, but I need to be alone. I walk around the block 3 times in the cold air trying to calm down. My mother still doesn't understand what she did wrong. She still thinks she's the victim. The letter makes everything worse instead of better. Luis finds me on the couch that night staring at my phone. He sits next to me and asks if I want to get away for the weekend. He says we could drive somewhere quiet and not check our phones for a few days. I agree immediately because the constant notifications and family drama are exhausting. We pack bags the next morning and drive 3 hours to a bed and breakfast in the mountains. The place is small and cozy with hiking trails nearby. We spend the first day walking through the woods without talking about my family. Luis points out birds and interesting trees. We stop by a stream and sit on the rocks listening to the water. The second day, we hike to a lookout point that shows the whole valley. We eat sandwiches we packed and watch clouds move across the sky. My phone stays in my bag the entire time. Without the constant buzzing and messages, I can actually think clearly. I realize how much energy I've spent my whole life trying to make my mother proud. Every decision I made was filtered through what she would think. Every accomplishment felt empty because I knew she'd compare it to Vanessa. Even my career choices were influenced by wanting her approval. Sitting on that mountain looking at the view, I understand that I'll never get what I want from her. She'll never see me the way I need her to. The thought should hurt, but instead it feels like relief. I don't have to try anymore. Luis takes my hand and we sit there until the sun starts to set. On the drive home, I feel different. Lighter somehow. The distance helped me see that my mother's opinion doesn't define my worth. We get back to the apartment and I turn my phone back on. 53 new messages wait for me. Most of them are from the family group chat, but there are several from my Uncle Cassius. He's been trying to organize a family meeting with a professional mediator. He sent me details about a therapist who specializes in family conflict. He writes that he thinks we could work through this if everyone sits down together and talks honestly. He means well, but the idea makes me tired. I call him back and thank him for trying to help. I tell him I'm not interested in sitting in a room with my mother and Vanessa. He sounds disappointed. He says he understands families are complicated, but that he hates seeing everyone torn apart. I explain that I'm not the one who tore things apart. My mother did that years ago, and I'm just finally responding to it. He's quiet for a minute before he says he gets it. He tells me the invitation stands if I change my mind. He says he'll always be there if I need him. I appreciate that he's trying, but I know a mediator won't fix this. My mother would just use it as another chance to make herself the victim. Cassius ends the call by telling me to take care of myself. I promise I will. A message comes through on Instagram from an account I don't recognize. The profile picture is blank and the username is just random letters and numbers. I almost delete it without reading, but something makes me open it. The message says she heard about everything through mutual friends and wants to reconnect. It's from Vivian, my best friend from high school. We lost touch after graduation when she went to college across the country. I haven't thought about her in years, but seeing her name brings back memories of sleepovers and late-night conversations. I message her back and we make plans to meet for lunch. She picks a restaurant halfway between our apartments. When I walk in, she stands up and hugs me immediately. She looks different, but her laugh is exactly the same. We order food and catch up on the last 8 years. She tells me about her job and her apartment and her dating life. Then she brings up my mother. She says she always thought my mother was cruel when we were teenagers. She remembers coming over to my house and watching my mother praise Vanessa while ignoring me. She tells me about a time when I got second place in a school competition, and my mother said it was a shame I couldn't be first like Vanessa. Vivian says she wanted to say something back then but didn't know how to help. She was just a kid herself and my mother scared her. She apologizes for not being braver. I tell her there was nothing she could have done. We talk for 3 hours and exchange phone numbers. She makes me promise we'll stay in touch this time. Having her back in my life feels like finding a piece of myself I forgot existed. A new Instagram account starts messaging me 2 days after lunch with Vivian. The messages claim Vanessa is the real victim in all of this. The account says I've turned the whole family against her and that she never wanted to hurt me. The messages say she was just following our mother's lead and didn't know how else to act. I read through them looking for any real apology or acknowledgement of what she did. There's nothing. Just excuses and blame shifting. The account says she's in therapy now and working on herself. It says she hopes we can rebuild our relationship someday. The tone is all wrong. It sounds like she's reading from a script about what she thinks I want to hear. There's no genuine understanding of the harm she caused. I screenshot every message and add them to the folder on my phone where I keep evidence of their behavior. Then I block the account. Within an hour, a different account messages me with the same profile picture. I block that one too. Vanessa is relentless, but I'm done engaging with her manipulation. Luis's parents invite us over for dinner on Saturday. His mother makes pot roast and his father sets the table with their nice dishes. After we eat, Luis's mother asks to talk to me privately. We go into the living room while Luis and his father clean up the kitchen. She sits next to me on the couch and takes my hand. She tells me that no matter what happens with my own family, she considers me part of theirs. She says she's already started thinking of me as her daughter. Her eyes get watery when she talks about how proud she is of how I've handled everything. She says watching me set boundaries and stand up for myself has been inspiring. She tells me that her own mother was difficult, and she understands how hard this is. She promises that I'll always have a place in their family. The acceptance makes my throat tight. I start crying and she hugs me. This is what a mother's love is supposed to feel like. Support without conditions. Pride without comparison. Love without cruelty. Luis and his father come back into the room and see us crying. Luis's father makes a joke about women and emotions, but his voice is kind. They all hug me before we leave. The drive home is quiet but peaceful. I have a family now. It's just not the one I was born into. Security calls me at work during my lunch break. They tell me my mother is in the lobby asking to see me. My heart starts racing. I tell them I'll be right down. I take the elevator and find her sitting in the waiting area crying. She's making a scene. Other people in the lobby are staring at her. She sees me and stands up. She starts talking loudly about how I won't return her calls and how I'm breaking her heart. She reaches for me, but I step back. I keep my voice calm and tell her she needs to leave. She says we need to talk and that I'm being unreasonable. I repeat that she needs to leave or I'll have security escort her out. She looks shocked, like she can't believe I'm serious. The security guard steps forward and asks if there's a problem. My mother's face changes. She stops crying and her expression goes cold. She tells me I'm going to regret this. She says I'm breaking her heart and that I'll understand when I have children of my own. Then she turns and walks toward the door. Before she leaves, she shouts across the lobby that I'm an ungrateful daughter. Everyone in the waiting area hears her. My face gets hot with embarrassment. The security guard apologizes and asks if I'm okay. I nod and go back upstairs. My hands shake the rest of the afternoon. I can't focus on work. My mother showed up at my job and made a scene in front of my coworkers. She crossed another line, and I know this won't be the last time. I call a therapist the next morning. Her name is Dr. Miller, and she specializes in family problems and toxic relationships. Her office has an opening that afternoon, so I take it. The waiting room is calm with soft music and comfortable chairs. Dr. Miller comes out to get me and leads me to her office. She has dark hair pulled back and kind eyes. She asks me to tell her what brought me in. I start with the engagement dinner and then go back to explain my whole childhood. She listens without interrupting. When I finish, she nods slowly. She tells me my mother's behavior fits something called narcissistic favoritism. She explains that some parents need to have a golden child and a scapegoat to feel in control. She says nothing I did caused it, and nothing I could have done would have fixed it. The validation from a professional makes something inside me relax. I'm not crazy. I'm not too sensitive. My mother's treatment of me was real and wrong. Dr. Miller asks about the boundaries I've set. I tell her about blocking my mother's calls and refusing to attend family events. She says those boundaries are healthy and appropriate. She warns me that my mother will likely escalate before she accepts them. She says people like my mother don't handle loss of control well. We schedule weekly appointments. I leave her office feeling less guilty about everything I've done. A professional who studies this stuff says I'm doing the right thing. That matters more than I expected. Fern calls me 3 days after my last therapy session and asks if Luis and I want to come over for dinner on Saturday. She says it'll just be her, Dominic, and their 2 kids. No drama, no tension, just family. I agree before I can overthink it. Saturday comes and Luis drives us to their house in the suburbs. My hands shake a little when we pull into the driveway. This is the first family gathering since the engagement dinner, and even though I trust Fern, old habits make me nervous. Dominic opens the door and hugs both of us. Their kids, Louisa and Jake, are teenagers now, and they wave at us from the living room. The house smells like roasted chicken and garlic. Fern comes out of the kitchen wiping her hands on a towel and pulls me into a hug that lasts longer than expected. She whispers that she's glad I came. Dinner is normal in a way I've never experienced with my family. We talk about work and school and the kids' sports teams. Nobody brings up my mother or Vanessa. Nobody makes comparisons or backhanded comments. When dessert comes out, Fern stands up with her wine glass. She says she wants to make a proper toast to my engagement, the one I should have gotten at the restaurant. She looks at Luis and tells him he's lucky to have me. She looks at me and says, I deserve someone who sees my worth. Louisa and Jake raise their glasses of soda and everyone drinks. My throat gets tight and I blink fast to keep from crying. This is what family is supposed to feel like. Over the next week, more relatives reach out. My second cousin, Michelle, sends me a long message about her own mother. She tells me her mom always favored her brother and made Michelle feel invisible growing up. We meet for coffee and talk for 2 hours. She understands the weird guilt that comes with cutting off a parent, even when that parent hurt you. She says she went through the same thing 5 years ago and her life got better once she stopped trying to fix the relationship. We exchange numbers and promise to stay in touch. My uncle on my father's side sends a text saying he supports me. 2 more cousins comment on old photos of me on social media with heart emojis. I'm building a network of family members who actually see me as a person, not as the backup daughter. It feels like starting over, but in a good way. I have relatives now who treat me with basic respect, and the bar was so low before that this feels amazing. My phone rings while I'm making breakfast. The caller ID shows my grandmother's number. I almost don't answer, but curiosity wins. I pick up and she starts talking immediately. She says she's worried about my mother's health. She claims my mother has been so stressed that she's had chest pains and went to the doctor. My grandmother's voice shakes when she tells me this is all my fault for refusing to forgive. I take a breath and keep my voice calm. I tell her that my mother's health is not my responsibility. I say that using health scares to manipulate me won't work anymore. My grandmother gasps like I've said something horrible. She tells me I'm being cruel and that family is supposed to forgive. I remind her that family is also supposed to treat each other with basic respect. She starts crying and says she doesn't understand how I became so cold. I tell her I learned boundaries from a therapist, not coldness. I hang up before she can say anything else. My hands shake, but I feel proud of myself for not backing down. Luis and I sit at our kitchen table with wedding magazines spread out in front of us. His parents offered to help pay for the wedding, which made me cry when they first suggested it. We start making a guest list. Luis writes down his family and our friends. I write down Fern, Dominic, Regina, my father, and a few other relatives who reached out with real support. My mother's name doesn't go on the list. Neither does Vanessa's. Luis asks if I'm sure, and I nod. He squeezes my hand and says, okay. We count the names and realize we're looking at a small wedding. Maybe 40 people total. Luis asks if that bothers me. I tell him it feels right. These are the people who actually care about us. Making these choices feels powerful instead of sad. I'm not inviting people out of obligation or fear. I'm choosing who gets to celebrate with us, and that choice is mine. An email notification pops up on my phone while I'm at work. It's from Vanessa's work email address, which I forgot to block. The subject line says, I'm sorry. I open it even though I know I probably shouldn't. She writes 3 paragraphs about how she's been going to therapy. She says she realizes now that our mother's favoritism damaged her too by making her dependent on being the best at everything. She claims she never learned how to have real relationships because she was too busy performing for our mother's approval. She asks if we can rebuild our relationship and says she wants to be real sisters. I read it twice. The whole email focuses on how hard things were for her. She talks about her own pain and her own therapy and her own realizations. She never actually apologizes for the specific things she did. She never mentions smiling when our mother said I wasn't good enough. She never acknowledges planning to flirt with Luis. The email is about her victimhood, not my hurt. I close it without responding. She doesn't get closure from me just because she decided she wants it. Dr. Miller and I spend our next session working on a letter to my mother. She calls it a boundary letter. We go through several drafts until we get it right. The letter says I will not have contact with my mother until she acknowledges the specific harm she caused throughout my life. It lists examples without being cruel. It says I need her to stop blaming me for the consequences of her own actions. It states clearly that I'm not asking for an apology that shifts blame or makes excuses. The letter is 1 page, single-spaced. Dr. Miller reads it and nods. She says it's clear and firm without being mean. We print it out and I sign it. I take it to the post office and send it certified mail so my mother can't claim she never got it. The woman at the counter asks if I want insurance on it. I almost laugh. No amount of insurance can protect what's in that envelope. My mother's response comes 3 days later, but not in a letter. She posts on Facebook about how she's a devoted mother being punished for loving both her daughters equally. She writes that some children don't appreciate the sacrifices parents make. She says she's heartbroken and doesn't understand where she went wrong. The post gets 20 likes and a dozen comments from people who don't know the full story. Several family members who weren't in the original group chat see the post and message me asking what's going on. I send them the screenshots of the texts between my mother and Vanessa. I send them a copy of the boundary letter. 3 relatives respond within an hour saying they had no idea things were this bad. They tell me they're done making excuses for her behavior. My mother's Facebook post stays up for 6 hours before she deletes it. I screenshot it first, just in case. Luis tells me to come home early from work on Friday. He won't say why, just that I need to be there by 5. I leave at 4:30 and drive home nervous. When I walk in, he's wearing a nice shirt and has a weird smile. He tells me to change into something comfortable and then we're leaving. I ask where we're going, and he says it's a surprise. 20 minutes later, we pull up to his parents' house. The driveway is full of cars I recognize. Luis opens my door and leads me around to the backyard. There are string lights hanging between the trees and a table with food and drinks. Fern and Dominic are there with their kids. Regina is there. Luis's best friend Grant came with his girlfriend. My father is standing near the food table looking uncomfortable but present. Luis's parents come over and his mother hugs me. She says Luis wanted to throw me a proper engagement party with people who actually love me. Everyone raises their glasses and Luis's father makes a toast about new beginnings. Then Fern stands up and gives a speech about how proud she is of the woman I've become despite everything. She says watching me set boundaries and choose myself has been inspiring. People clap and I start crying. This is the first celebration in my entire life where I'm the center of positive attention without conditions or comparisons. My boss calls me into her office Monday morning and I assume I'm in trouble. Instead, she tells me I'm being promoted to senior analyst. The position comes with a raise and my own office. She says I've earned it through my work quality and leadership. I thank her and somehow make it back to my desk without floating away. The first people I call are Luis and his parents. Luis screams into the phone and says we're celebrating tonight. His mother cries happy tears and says she's so proud. I'm sitting at my desk holding my phone when it hits me. I didn't think about calling my mother. The impulse to share good news with her just isn't there anymore. I wait for the sadness to come, but it doesn't. Instead, I feel lighter. I'm building a life where her opinion doesn't matter, and that realization doesn't hurt the way I thought it would. Regina texts me asking if we can meet for coffee. I agree, and we meet at a place near her office. She orders for both of us and then sits down looking serious. She tells me that Vanessa reached out to her asking if Regina would mediate a conversation between us. Regina says she told Vanessa she'd ask me but wouldn't pressure me either way. She looks at me and asks what I want to do. I tell her I'm not ready and might never be. Regina nods and says that's a completely valid choice. She promises to tell Vanessa no without making me the bad guy. I thank her for respecting my decision, instead of trying to convince me that family should forgive. Regina reaches across the table and squeezes my hand. She says some family relationships aren't worth saving, and that's okay. 2 weeks later, my father texts me asking if we can meet for coffee. He says my mother doesn't know he's reaching out and he wants to talk to me alone. I agree to meet him at a place across town where we won't run into anyone we know. When I walk in, he's already sitting at a corner table looking older than I remember. His face has new lines around his eyes and his shoulders slump forward like he's carrying something heavy. He stands up when he sees me and we hug awkwardly before sitting down. He asks how I'm doing and I tell him I'm fine, which is mostly true. Then he's quiet for a long time, stirring his coffee even though he hasn't added anything to it. He finally looks up and tells me he's sorry. He says he's sorry for not protecting me better when I was growing up. He says living with my mother's anger about the situation has been exhausting, and he can't pretend anymore that everything she did was normal. He looks tired when he says it, like admitting this out loud took something from him. I don't know what to say because I've waited my whole life to hear him acknowledge what happened, but now that he's saying it, I feel numb instead of relieved. The apology doesn't fix anything. It doesn't give me back the childhood I should have had, or erase the years of comparisons and put-downs, but it's more accountability than I expected from him, and I tell him that. We sit there for another hour talking about small things, avoiding the real conversation we probably should be having. When we're getting ready to leave, I tell him I'm willing to have a relationship with him if he can respect my boundaries. I say I won't discuss my mother with him, and I won't let him try to reconcile us. He agrees immediately, almost desperately, like he's been waiting for permission to have a relationship with me that doesn't involve her. We decide to meet once a month for coffee and keep things simple. It's not a close relationship, but it's more honest than what we had before. I drive home feeling strange, like I just made peace with something I didn't know I needed to make peace with. The next morning, I wake up to a text message from my grandmother. It's long and formal, the kind of message she probably spent an hour composing. She says I'm no longer welcome at family holidays and that she's ashamed of me for treating my mother this way. She says a daughter who would humiliate her mother in public and refuse to apologize is no granddaughter of hers. She lists all the upcoming holidays I'm banned from, like she's crossing my name off a guest list. I read the message twice, waiting for the hurt to come, but instead I feel relief washing over me. I'm being excluded from events that always made me miserable anyway. Thanksgiving dinners where my mother would comment on my weight while praising how thin Vanessa looked. Christmas mornings where my gifts were always practical things like socks while Vanessa got jewelry and designer clothes. Easter brunches where my grandmother would ask why I wasn't married yet while Vanessa got congratulated on her latest achievement. Now I have an excuse to skip all of it without guilt. I screenshot the message and send it to Luis with a caption that says, "I guess we're having our own holidays now." He responds immediately saying his parents already invited us to everything, and we're going to start our own traditions. I delete my grandmother's message without responding, and make myself breakfast feeling lighter than I have in weeks. Luis and I spend the next Saturday looking at wedding venues. We've seen 3 places that were fine but didn't feel right. Then we pull up to a small garden space tucked behind a historic building downtown. The owner shows us around and I fall in love immediately. There are stone pathways winding between flower beds and an arbor covered in climbing roses. A small patio area holds maybe 50 people, and string lights hang between the trees. It's intimate and beautiful, and nothing like the big fancy venues my mother would have wanted. Luis squeezes my hand, and I know he feels it too. We book it for 6 months from now and put down a deposit. The owner congratulates us and says she can tell we're going to have a beautiful wedding. Driving home, we talk about the guest list, and Luis suggests we only invite people who genuinely celebrate our relationship. No obligation invites, no family members who make us uncomfortable, just the people who have shown up for us. Planning the wedding starts to feel joyful instead of stressful. We stop for lunch and make lists on napkins of who we want there. My father's name goes on the list. My Aunt Fern and Uncle Dominic, Regina and Vivian, Luis's whole family. By the time we're done, the list has 42 names and every single one of them is someone who makes me happy. I'm at the grocery store the following Tuesday when I see one of my mother's friends in the produce section. She spots me before I can turn down a different aisle and walks over with a tight smile. She asks how I'm doing in that fake, concerned voice people use when they're really just fishing for gossip. I tell her I'm great and try to move past her, but she steps in front of my cart. She says she heard about what happened at the engagement dinner, and that my mother is heartbroken. She says it's such a shame when children don't appreciate everything their parents do for them. She looks at me like she expects me to apologize or defend myself. Instead, I look her right in the eye and tell her my mother broke my heart for 26 years, and one uncomfortable dinner doesn't compare. I say if she's so concerned about my mother's feelings, maybe she should ask her why she thought it was okay to tell me my sister deserved my fiancé more. The woman's mouth opens, but nothing comes out. I push my cart past her and walk away feeling proud of myself for not apologizing or shrinking down to make her comfortable. My hands shake a little as I finish shopping, but it's from adrenaline, not shame. I'm learning to defend myself without feeling guilty about it. In my next therapy session, I tell my therapist about the interaction at the grocery store and about my father reaching out. She listens carefully, and then asks me how I feel about the idea of losing my mother permanently. I tell her I don't know because I'm not sure I ever really had the mother I needed in the first place. She nods and explains that I'm mourning the relationship I needed, not the one that actually existed. She says it's normal to grieve the parent I wish I had while also accepting that the real relationship was harmful. Understanding this distinction helps something click into place in my brain. I've been waiting my whole life for my mother to suddenly become the parent I deserved, but that was never going to happen. The mother I needed doesn't exist and never did. What I'm losing is the hope that she might change, and that hope was keeping me stuck. My therapist asks what it would look like to stop waiting for her to become someone different. I think about it and realize it would look like the life I'm building now. A life where her opinion doesn't define my worth, and her presence doesn't determine my happiness. I leave the session feeling like I just put down something heavy I didn't realize I was carrying. Vivian calls me that weekend and asks if I want to meet some of her friends. She's having people over for dinner and thinks I'd like them. I agree, even though I'm nervous about meeting new people who might have heard about the family drama. When I get to her apartment, there are 6 other women there, all around our age. Vivian introduces me, and nobody asks about my family or brings up anything uncomfortable. We eat and talk about normal things like work and shows we're watching and places we want to travel. One woman tells a funny story about her terrible boss, and another talks about training for a marathon. They ask me about my job and my wedding plans and seem genuinely interested in my answers. Nobody compares me to anyone or makes me feel like I need to prove myself. The conversation flows easily, and I realize I've been so isolated by family drama for years that I forgot what normal friendships feel like. These people know me as I am now, not as the backup daughter or the girl whose mother doesn't love her enough. When I leave that night, I have 3 new phone numbers and plans to meet 2 of them for brunch next weekend. I text Vivian thanking her, and she responds saying she's glad I came and that her friends really liked me. It's such a simple thing, but it makes me feel like I'm building a real life separate from my family history. On Monday morning, a delivery person shows up at my office with a huge bouquet of flowers. My coworkers gather around as I read the card. It says she forgives me in my mother's handwriting. I stare at it for a second, and then I actually laugh out loud. The manipulation is so obvious it's almost funny. She forgives me. Like I'm the one who did something wrong. Like she's the bigger person for overlooking my terrible behavior. My coworker asks if everything is okay, and I tell her these flowers are from someone who doesn't understand that forgiveness works both ways. I look up nursing homes near my office and find one 2 blocks away. I walk the bouquet over during my lunch break and donate it to their activities coordinator. She's thrilled and says the residents will love having fresh flowers in the common room. I don't text my mother or call to acknowledge that I received them. I don't send a thank you card or any response at all. The silence is my answer, and it feels powerful. That evening, Luis asks if my mother sent anything else, and I tell him about the flowers. He shakes his head and says he can't believe she still doesn't get it. I tell him I think she finally does get it. She just doesn't want to accept it. There's a difference between not understanding and not wanting to change, and my mother falls into the second category. 2 weeks later, Luis gets a call from his mother asking if we can come over for dinner. When we arrive, his whole family is there, including his aunt and uncle and some cousins I haven't met yet. His mother pulls me aside and asks if it would be okay if they officially introduced me as their future daughter-in-law at a family reunion they're planning. She says they want everyone to know how happy they are that I'm joining the family. The invitation makes me emotional because it represents the family acceptance I've always wanted, but never had. I tell her yes and thank her for thinking of me. At the reunion 3 weeks later, Luis's extended family welcomes me with genuine warmth. His grandmother hugs me and says she's heard wonderful things about me. His cousins ask about the wedding and want to see pictures of the venue. One of his aunts pulls me aside and tells me she can see how happy I make Luis, and that's all that matters to his family. Nobody asks invasive questions about my own family or makes me feel like I need to explain anything. They accept me because Luis loves me, and because I'm kind to him, and that's enough for them. I spend the afternoon talking and laughing with people who chose to welcome me into their lives. When we leave that night, I tell Luis his family is amazing, and he says they think I'm amazing too. For the first time, I'm part of a family that actually wants me there. I'm sitting at my desk one afternoon when I realize I haven't checked my phone anxiously for messages from my mother or Vanessa in days. The constant vigilance I lived with for months has faded without me noticing. I used to wake up every morning and immediately look at my phone, bracing myself for whatever manipulation or guilt trip might be waiting. Now I check my messages when I feel like it, and I don't panic when I see notifications. That evening in therapy, I mention this to my therapist, and she smiles. She says this is what peace feels like, and I should pay attention to how different my life is without their toxicity. She asks me to describe what peace feels like, and I realize it feels like breathing easier. It feels like not having a knot in my stomach all the time. It feels like being able to enjoy good things without waiting for someone to ruin them. My therapist says I've done the hard work of setting boundaries, and now I'm experiencing the reward of that work. She reminds me that peace doesn't mean nothing bad will ever happen. It just means I'm not living in constant crisis mode anymore. I drive home feeling grateful for how far I've come and how much lighter my life feels now. Fern calls me 2 weeks later and asks if I want to come over for dinner. She says it's just going to be her and Dominic and a few other family members who supported me through everything. She tells me she's been thinking about starting a new tradition, something for the people in our family who actually care about healthy relationships. I tell her I'd love to come, and she sounds genuinely happy. The dinner happens on a Saturday night at her house, and when I arrive, I see Regina is there along with 2 other cousins I haven't seen in years. Everyone hugs me and tells me how proud they are of me for standing up to my mother. We eat lasagna and garlic bread, and nobody brings up my mother or Vanessa unless it's to support the boundaries I've set. Fern raises her glass and says she wants to make this a quarterly thing. Just us, the family members who believe in treating each other with respect. Everyone agrees, and I feel like I've found something I didn't know I needed. This is what family dinners should feel like. Relaxed and full of actual laughter instead of tension and comparisons. Luis and I celebrate our 1-year anniversary of dating 3 days later. He takes me to the same restaurant where we had our first date, and we order the same food we had back then. Over dessert, he tells me he's been thinking about how much I've changed in the past few months. He says watching me stand up for myself at the engagement dinner made him love me even more because he saw how strong I really am. I tell him I was terrified that setting boundaries would push people away, but instead it just made room for better relationships. He reaches across the table and holds my hand and says, "That's exactly what happened. Protecting myself didn't cost me love, it just cleared out the fake love to make space for the real thing." I realize he's right, and I feel grateful that he's been beside me through all of this. A week later, I get a message on Facebook from a cousin I barely know named Sarah. She lives 3 states away, and we've only met a handful of times at big family events. Her message says she heard about what happened with my mother through the family grapevine, and she wanted to reach out. She tells me she's dealing with something similar in her own family, where her brother is the favorite, and she's always been treated like she doesn't matter. She asks if I have any advice on how to handle it. I write back and tell her about therapy and setting boundaries, and learning that you can't make someone value you if they're determined not to. We message back and forth for an hour, and by the end, she thanks me for being honest about how hard it is. Turning my painful experience into something that helps someone else feels meaningful in a way I didn't expect. I screenshot part of our conversation and show it to my therapist at our next session, and she smiles and says, "This is part of my healing too." My father calls me a few days later and asks if we can meet for coffee. When we sit down, he looks nervous and tired. He tells me he started going to therapy himself and he doesn't want to get into all the details, but he says my boundary letter made him realize some things. He says he spent decades enabling my mother's behavior and pretending it wasn't as bad as it was. He admits he should have protected me when I was growing up, and he didn't. I appreciate that he's taking responsibility, even though it's way too late to change the past. He asks if we can keep having our monthly coffee meetings, and I tell him yes, as long as he respects my boundaries about not discussing my mother. He agrees, and we finish our coffee talking about safer topics like his garden and my work projects. Vanessa sends an email to my work address 2 weeks later. The subject line says final message, and I almost delete it without reading, but curiosity gets the better of me. She writes that she's accepted I don't want a relationship with her, and she's not going to try to contact me anymore. She says she hopes I'll be happy and that she's moving on with her life. There's no actual apology for anything specific she did, just vague words about hoping things work out for me. I read it twice and then delete it without responding. I don't owe her closure, and her happiness isn't my responsibility. The fact that she still can't apologize for her actual actions tells me everything I need to know about whether she's really changed. Luis and I spend an entire Sunday afternoon working on our wedding guest list. We've been putting it off because we knew it would be complicated, but we finally sit down and go through everyone. The final list comes to 42 people. It includes his entire family, my father, Fern and Dominic, Regina, and a few other supportive cousins. Our close friends and I even add my therapist as a guest because she's been such an important part of my healing. Luis looks at the list and says it represents something important. These are people we chose or who chose us, not people we're inviting out of obligation. The list feels right, and I don't feel guilty about who's missing from it. I start writing my wedding vows the next week. I want them to be personal and honest, not just generic promises. I include a line about building a family based on respect and genuine love, about choosing each other every day and creating something better than what we came from. I read them to Luis during our rehearsal dinner practice, and he gets tears in his eyes halfway through. When I finish, his parents come over and hug me, and his mother says she's honored to be part of my new family story. Luis's father tells me they've always wanted a daughter, and they're so glad it's me. The acceptance from his family still catches me off guard sometimes because it's so different from what I grew up with. 3 weeks before the wedding, Luis's mother calls me sounding upset. She tells me my mother sent a letter to their house asking them to convince me to invite her to the wedding. The letter apparently goes on for pages about how hurt she is, and how she's my mother and deserves to be there. Luis's mother reads me a few lines over the phone, and I can hear the manipulation in every sentence. I tell her I appreciate her letting me know, and we decide together that she'll write back saying it's not her place to interfere in our decisions. Luis's mother says she'll mail the response tomorrow, and that she supports whatever boundaries I need to set. I'm grateful that his family protects my choices without me having to ask them to. Regina calls me a few days later and offers to be on what she calls mother duty the day of the wedding. She says she'll keep an eye out in case my mother tries to show up uninvited, and she'll handle the situation if it happens. Luis and I talk about it and decide to hire security for the venue just in case. The security company says they deal with uninvited guests at weddings more often than people think, and they'll make sure nobody crashes who isn't on our list. Knowing I'm protected lets me actually look forward to my wedding day instead of spending it worried about what my mother might do. Regina texts me later that night and says she's got my back no matter what, and I believe her. The week before the wedding, I wake up feeling genuinely happy and excited instead of anxious. I get ready for work and realize I'm not bracing myself for something to go wrong or for someone to ruin the day. In therapy that afternoon, I mention this to my therapist, and she points out that this is what it looks like when you're not constantly preparing for criticism or disappointment. She says I've done the hard work of removing toxic people from my life, and now I get to experience what peace actually feels like. I'm marrying someone who loves me exactly as I am, I'm surrounded by people who celebrate me instead of tearing me down, and I don't have to perform or prove my worth to anyone. The relief of that realization makes me emotional in the best possible way. Fern's house smells like vanilla and flowers when I arrive for the bridal shower. The living room is packed with women who have shown up for me, not out of obligation, but because they actually want to celebrate. Regina hugs me at the door and whispers that she helped Fern plan everything, and I can already feel tears starting. Luis's mother is here with 2 of his aunts, and they wave from the couch where they're chatting with Vivian. My cousin Sarah from my dad's side brought her daughter, and even my therapist accepted the invitation, which makes me feel seen in a way I never expected. Fern has set up games and decorations, but what hits me hardest is that nobody here has ever made me feel like I wasn't enough. The shower starts with everyone sharing a story about me, and I brace myself for the usual backhanded compliments disguised as praise. But Regina goes first and talks about the time I stood up to a bully in middle school who was picking on a younger kid, and how that moment showed her I had more courage than most adults she knew. Vivian tells everyone about how I helped her through her parents' divorce by just listening without judgment, and Luis's aunt mentions how Luis lights up every time he talks about me. Each story reveals qualities I didn't know other people noticed, strengths my mother never acknowledged because she was too busy comparing me to Vanessa. By the time we get to the gift opening, I'm crying happy tears, and Fern hands me tissues while laughing. The gifts are thoughtful and personal, things chosen because people actually know who I am. Then Luis's mother stands up and asks if she can give me something special. She pulls out a delicate silver bracelet with tiny charms, and her voice shakes a little as she explains that it belonged to her own mother. She says she's been waiting for the right person to give it to, someone who would appreciate not just the jewelry, but what it represents. She fastens it around my wrist and tells me it's my something borrowed, but really it's about welcoming me into their family officially. I lose it completely and hug her while everyone else gets teary too. This is what it feels like to be chosen and valued, to receive love without waiting for the criticism that always followed it in my original family. The shower wraps up with cake and more laughter, and as people leave, each one hugs me and tells me how happy they are for my wedding. Driving home, I keep looking at the bracelet and thinking about how different this celebration was from anything my mother ever hosted for me. 2 days before the wedding, my phone rings while I'm confirming final details with the florist. It's my father, and my stomach tightens automatically, even though we've been doing better. He asks if I have a minute to talk, and I step outside onto the balcony. He says he's calling to confirm he's still walking me down the aisle, which we already discussed, but then his voice gets quieter. He tells me he knows he can't make up for all the years he stood by while my mother tore me down, but he wants to be part of my future if I'll let him. He says watching me set boundaries and build a life without my mother's toxicity has made him realize how much damage he allowed by staying silent. I tell him yes, he can walk me down the aisle, and while our relationship will never be what it could have been, I appreciate his effort to do better now. He thanks me and his voice cracks a little, and after we hang up, I sit on the balcony for a while thinking about forgiveness and second chances. I'm not ready to forget everything, but I'm willing to let him try. The morning of the wedding, I wake up feeling calm instead of anxious. Luis already left for his parents' house where he's getting ready with the groomsmen, and Regina and Vivian arrive at my apartment with coffee and bagels. They help me shower and start on my hair, and the whole process feels easy and fun. We laugh about Regina's disaster of a first date last month, and Vivian's new puppy who keeps eating her shoes, and there's no underlying tension or competition. When it's time to put on my dress, they both help with the tiny buttons down the back, and when I finally look in the mirror, I feel beautiful without needing anyone to tell me I am. The dress fits perfectly, and the bracelet from Luis's mother catches the light. Regina takes a million photos, and Vivian gets emotional, and I realize this is what getting ready for your wedding should feel like. No one is comparing me to anyone else or pointing out flaws or making jokes at my expense. We're just three women celebrating a happy moment, and it feels completely right. The ceremony venue is exactly what Luis and I wanted. A small garden with flowers everywhere and chairs set up for our 42 guests. I wait in the back room with my father while the music starts and he adjusts his tie nervously. When it's time to walk down the aisle, he offers his arm and we step out into the sunlight. Luis is standing at the front with the officiant, and the second he sees me, tears start running down his face. My father walks slowly like he's trying to make the moment last, and halfway down the aisle he leans over and whispers that he's proud of me. For once, I believe a family member's compliment without analyzing it for hidden criticism or waiting for the other shoe to drop. When we reach the front, my father hugs me before handing me off to Luis, and I can see he's crying too. The ceremony itself is simple and perfect. The officiant talks about love and commitment, and then Luis starts his vows. His voice shakes as he promises to always see my worth even when I struggle to see it myself, to be my family when my original family failed me, and to spend every day proving that I deserve to be loved exactly as I am. By the time he finishes, half the guests are crying and I'm barely holding it together. I manage to get through my own vows about building something better together, and when the officiant pronounces us married, Luis kisses me and everyone applauds. The reception is in the same garden under string lights that make everything glow. We eat and talk and dance, and Dominic stands up to give a toast. He talks about how the strongest families are the ones we choose, not just the ones we're born into, and how watching me set boundaries and build a life on my own terms has inspired other family members to examine their own relationships. He says this room full of people who actually love me is more like family than any holiday gathering ever was, and several people nod in agreement. When Luis and I dance to our first song, I realize I'm not thinking about who's missing from the room. I'm not scanning for my mother or Vanessa or wondering if they'll show up to ruin things. I'm fully present with the people who showed up, the ones who proved their love through actions instead of just words. My mother's absence doesn't diminish the joy at all. If anything, it protects it and lets me enjoy the day without bracing for criticism. At the end of the night, Luis's parents find us by the cake table and pull us both into a hug. His mother says she didn't just gain a daughter-in-law today. She gained a daughter, and the distinction matters more than I can explain. His father says they're proud to call me family, and I thank them for accepting me so completely. I'm building a new family story where I'm valued and celebrated, where my worth isn't dependent on comparison or competition, and my mother's narrative about me being the backup daughter has no power here. Luis and I say goodbye to the last guests and head to the hotel where we're staying before our flight tomorrow, and I feel lighter than I have in years. On our honeymoon in Hawaii, Luis and I spend the first few days just relaxing on the beach and not thinking about family drama. But one evening while we're watching the sunset, we start talking about the future and what kind of parents we want to be someday. Luis says he wants our kids to feel equally loved and supported, and I agree immediately. We talk about how we'll never compare siblings or play favorites, how we'll celebrate each child's unique strengths instead of ranking them against each other. I tell him our children will never wonder which one is loved more, and will break the cycle of favoritism and comparison that my mother created. Turning my pain into a promise to do better feels like the ultimate victory over my mother's legacy. Like I'm taking all that hurt and transforming it into something protective and healing for the next generation. Somewhere during the honeymoon, I realize I've stopped defining myself in relation to Vanessa or my mother. When I think about who I am, I don't automatically compare myself to my sister, or measure my worth by my mother's standards. I'm not the backup daughter anymore. I'm just myself, and that's enough. The voice in my head that used to sound like my mother's criticism has gotten quieter, replaced by my own voice telling me I'm worthy exactly as I am. I look at Luis sleeping beside me one morning and think about the life we're building together, and I feel grateful for every hard decision that led me here. Setting boundaries hurt and cost me relationships, but it also freed me to become someone I actually like. 3 months pass after the wedding, and I'm sitting at a coffee shop when my phone rings with my father's number. I answer and hear his voice, quieter than usual, telling me he needs to talk. He says he's moved into a hotel temporarily and separated from my mother. The words hang in the air between us for a moment before he explains that watching me build a life without her toxicity made him realize how much her behavior affected his own happiness. He sounds tired but also relieved, like he's been carrying something heavy for years and finally set it down. I tell him I'm not going to pressure him about what he decides to do long term, but I'm glad he's taking care of himself. We talk for another 20 minutes about nothing important, just normal conversation without the weight of my mother's presence influencing every word. When we hang up, I sit with my coffee and realize this is what happens when you stop accepting cruelty as normal. Other people start to notice it too. The following week, I have my regular therapy appointment and my therapist reviews the progress I've made over the past several months. She suggests we move to monthly sessions instead of weekly, because I've built such a strong foundation of self-worth. She reminds me that healing isn't a straight line and I'll probably still have hard days. But the work I've done means my mother's voice in my head doesn't control me anymore. I can hear criticism without believing I deserve it. I can set boundaries without drowning in guilt. I can accept love without waiting for the conditions that come after it. I leave her office and walk to my car feeling proud of how far I've come from the woman who used to apologize for existing. November arrives and Luis and I decide to host our first holiday dinner in our apartment. We invite his parents, my father, Aunt Fern, Uncle Dominic, Regina, Vivian, and Grant. I spend the morning cooking while Luis sets the table, and when everyone arrives, the apartment fills with voices and laughter that feels genuine. Nobody makes comparisons between me and anyone else. Nobody gives compliments with hidden insults attached. Fern brings a pie and hugs me in the kitchen, telling me how happy she is to see me thriving. My father sits on the couch talking to Luis's dad about golf, and the conversation is easy and comfortable. Grant tells a story about Luis in college that makes everyone laugh, and Vivian helps me carry dishes to the table. We eat and talk, and someone suggests a game after dinner, and the whole evening feels warm and safe. This is what family is supposed to feel like. People who show up because they want to, not because they have to. People who celebrate you instead of tolerate you. I look around the table at faces that chose to be here and realize I finally have what I always wanted. A year passes since the engagement dinner that changed everything. I wake up next to Luis in the apartment we share, and think about how different my life looks now. I have a husband who loves me without conditions or comparisons. I have in-laws who treat me like their actual daughter instead of someone they're stuck with. I have a chosen family of relatives and friends who celebrate my wins and support me through hard days. But most importantly, I have my own approval. I don't need my mother to validate my worth anymore because I know it myself. Her opinion used to define everything about how I saw myself, but now it's just noise I don't have to listen to. The freedom that comes from that realization is worth every uncomfortable conversation, every boundary I had to set, every relationship I had to let go of to protect my peace. I'm not the backup daughter anymore. I'm just me, and that's enough.